Where should I put this? No, I meant a chess engine. Hello and welcome. Today, we're taking a look at how to use our 3000 plus rated buddy over here to our advantage and make him very useful. Let's go. First thing we're going to talk about is, should you analyze all your games? And the answer is a clear yes. Ideally, right after you play the game, you immediately go into analysis while your thoughts are still fresh. That way, you can know what you were thinking and why that would possibly be a mistake so that you get a practical lesson for next time. So let's take a look throughout 3 games how we can use the engine in order to help ourselves analyze the game better and see more practical takeaways for next time. I've chosen 3 games from my students without telling them about it. The first game is from a 500-600 rated student. He hovers between that range. The second game is going to be from a 1300 student. And the third one from an 1800 student. So I've covered pretty much all ranges just so you have a sense of how to analyze for each range, because based on your skill level, the analysis will be a little bit different. Some things will matter more than others. Let's get started with the first game. So this is a 550 rated game about there, and we're just going to scroll through until we find the first instructive moment. So just to see that this was a real game, I'm going to quickly scroll through until the first important moment. So just normal development for both sides, and here's our first inaccuracy. Now, the first lesson of this video is going to be to not care about inaccuracies. This has no impact on the rest of the game, essentially. At this level, that doesn't matter at all. When you're 2000 plus, or let's say 1800 plus, then these things will start to matter. Right now, at the level of 550, or generally just under 1000, this is completely irrelevant. So if you ask a high-rated player or a coach to explain why this is an inaccuracy, they will. They'd be happy to help you, but you should know that this shouldn't be your main focus. Doesn't have much impact on the result of the game. Why is this an inaccuracy? I will explain just in case you're curious. Essentially, when a pawn goes over halfway, so into enemy territory, basically, this would be white's territory, quote unquote, when it does so in the opening without development, this is considered overextending and it's weak because we don't have the pieces to take up all of this space. So if your opponent knows about this, then they're going to play b3, a pawn break, and after you pretty much have to take, they take back the pawn, and you have traded your c pawn for the a pawn. That's good for white. They open up the rook, they have more center pawns, and so on. So for this reason, this would be an inaccurate move. It also doesn't complete any of the opening rules, any of the opening objectives of piece development and castling. So the opening should be treated as a race. Whenever you make a move that doesn't develop a piece or castle or control the center or something, that's a waste of time and usually an inaccuracy. So it's going to make it a little bit more difficult to play. That is why this move is an inaccuracy, but it will not decide the game at this level by any means. A 500 rated game, or most games under 1000, are basically decided by blunders. Who will hang the least amount of pieces, who will blunder checkmate, something like this. Like very severe mistakes. This would be just a small mistake. So white just develops and we have a game. Let's see how it continues. So we said don't care about inaccuracies. Queen b5 is another inaccuracy because it goes a little bit aggressive without development. And this queen is pretty likely to get trapped if we go a little bit too far. Often these b pawns are quite poisonous in openings. Moving on, we're looking for our first mistake. There it is. So this is our first mistake. So you should only care about a mistake, blunder, or a miss. Those are pretty severe changes in evaluation that either lose material or sometimes even get checkmated. So these are the ones that we take our lessons from. These are the most instructive moments. So now we're going to help ourselves with Mr. Engine over here in trying to realize why this is a mistake. Because it looks like a very logical move. The idea is like, oh, we have the knight pinned, so what do we do with pinned pieces? We put pressure on them. So knight e5, put pressure on the pinned piece. However, why is this a mistake? So now you can use your dear friend, the engine, and you can essentially have a conversation with the engine. What does that mean? Basically, you play one side, and the engine tells you what the other side should play. So right now, the engine is, when they say this, basically the engine is trying to say, oh, this is the evaluation after this sequence of moves. So that's how we read the engine in the first place. So the first variation here is this long variation that the engine has calculated, the best for both sides. And as you can see, it goes very much in depth. And after that whole line happens, the evaluation will be minus almost 2 points. And in case we play the second best move as black, bishop takes b1, then the evaluation will be slightly less advantageous to black. So the engine is basically trying to say, hey, a6 is the problem with this move. And that's not immediately clear for, most players. So when I say have a conversation with the engine, that essentially means just go deeper into the variation to try to play a little bit of this until it becomes clear and logical. Oh, that's why it is. Because for me, maybe it's not immediately logical. So after a6, I could just say, hey, engine, can't I just play queen a4 and keep the pin going? Like, that doesn't seem too threatening. And then I could do my idea again. And then the engine answers me, oh, actually, you can't because of b5. So I'm like, okay, what is b5? This is b5. Oh, I get it now. So he breaks the pin. Black breaks the pin. So now I have to go back. Let's say queen a3, queen d1, something. And now, because the pin is no longer here, now it's black's turn to go aggressive, so they could take my knight. So they could take my knight, I have to take back with a pawn, and they could take my pawn. That's what the engine is suggesting. Yeah, exactly. So here, d takes e5, and queen takes e5. And now we could be like, oh, okay, I see. I lost a pawn in that exchange. So why is it not -1? Why is it minus 2.37? Because this accounts for not only material, but also positional aspects. So -1 would be the material deficit, and the other -1.37, let's say, would be the center control for black, the slightly better development, and so on. So there are other aspects that come into this number when you see it like this, but that's essentially how you would read this and how you would have a conversation with the engine. So now I could go back to the original position by scrolling back, and I could say, okay, I understand that I can't go queen a4, Mr. Engine, but can't I go queen c5? That would also keep the pin over here. So instead of this pin, I have this one. But again, knight takes knight is not a move because I would just take the queen. And then I take a look at what the engine has to say. So the engine says 94. Huh. What is 90? This is 94. What does that do? That doesn't seem to do anything here. That's a very strange move. Then you take a look around and it's like, oh, he attacks my queen. Okay. Very interesting. But Mr. Engine, can't I just go back? Like my queen is not trapped. And then the engine's like, oh yeah, but then I could take this. So that's how we simulate the conversation. Again, takes, we have to take back not to be down a piece. And they could either recapture or just recapture this later because we have a tough time defending it. So apparently some sort of b5 is even slightly better. But these are decimal points. That's another lesson to take away. When it comes to these 0.1, 0.2, don't take it to heart. The only reason why you want to use the engine is as a rough guideline instead of absolute truth. You can't say, oh, this is 1.87, so b5 is better than queen takes e5. No, not really, because the engine bases that off of these 20, so from 14 to 22, these 16 moves of calculation, or however many. So 8 moves, but for both sides. And the second one also, but this is not human. This is not realistic for us to see. For a human, you see free material, you take free material, end of story. b5 would make me very nervous because of f4, and then the chance to take the e5 pawn is gone. So this is how you have to basically have a conversation with the engine. So as black, I would expect them to just play this and say, hey, I'm up a pawn with a great position and doing well. Pretty cool. So that is why 95 is a mistake. And once you understand that, then you could be like, okay, is it realistic for me to see that? As a 500 rated player, probably not, to be honest. Because it's not immediately obvious. So this is like breaking the pin by force to be able to take a pawn, and there's nothing the white could do about it. So this is just saying, oh, okay, fair enough. I made a mistake, but I don't consider that really a mistake. So you have to be a little bit self-aware and say, okay, that's a very deep thing to see for a 500 rated player. So if one of my students blunders something like this at this level, I would say, okay, it happened, no worries. Like that's a bit too far to see. It's a bit unrealistic. No worries. I mean, you lost a pawn. No big deal. Then the game continues. The opponent castles. So they did not take this opportunity. Queen c5 was played, and this is a mistake. Huh. Not clear why. So we take a look at the engine. Oh, 94. So my queen is getting under a lot of pressure here and is potentially trapped, but not quite, because again, queen a3, but then they take here. So it's always the same thing as before. And what happened here? Black played b6 instead. And this is a blunder for black. Why is this a blunder? Because they undefend their c6 knight. So their idea was to like attack the queen and force us to go back, but instead we could use our attacked queen to take the knight, and that would be defended by ours. As indicated by the engine, so queen takes c6, taking the knight, would be plus 3.4 because we just win a free piece. Everything else would be minus 1 point, however much, because we would just lose the d pawn as shown earlier. So we take this one, rook c8, queen b5. So notice that this is not the best move, but it's a good move. It's completely fine. Objectively, it would be much better to trade queens here because we're up a piece. When we are up material, we want to trade equally. I'm going to link a video down in the description to explain that. So I made a video on why to simplify when you're up material, in case that's something you haven't heard before. So the best move is here to trade, but even this is fine. It's just going to make it slightly more difficult to play going forward, but no worries. Knight d7 was played, unfortunately hanging the knight because there's 2 attackers and only 1 defender. So we could just take it. If they take back, we take back, and we win that little skirmish, so we're up another piece. However, we played knight takes c4. And this is flagged as a miss because we missed a better move. But it could also be a blunder for the reason that we're giving up our knight for 2 pawns here in this exchange. If we're able to win that exchange. But actually, if you count the defenders and attackers, according to the quick count, which is a bit of a shortcut, you're going to see that we actually lose if we continue capturing. What do I mean by that? So let's go move by move instead of the quick count where you count the attackers and defenders of a certain point where the battle is taking place. It's much better to take your time and go move by move and calculate slowly. So you would go, oh, if I take this, my opponent is going to take, and then I would take with the bishop, they take with the queen, I take with the queen, and then they take with the rook. And I have nothing back to recapture with, so I would lose pieces in that exchange. And you have to go really slow to make sure you're not missing any piece or something like this. But knight c4 unfortunately loses 1 piece, and then bishop c4 was also played. This is a blunder because it's a 2 versus 1 according to the quick count, but you can also go move by move. He takes, I take, he takes, and that's going to be lost. Unfortunately for black, they didn't see it, so the game continues. So you can see this constant back and forth of somebody blunders a piece, the other side doesn't see it, and so on. So this is basically a game of this level. That's just how it is. So you want to make sure that you calculate ahead of time, use the 2 most important questions in chess, which I've also made videos on, so link below. And these kind of blunders should stop happening. But as you can see, the engine basically tells us, oh, this is a blunder, and then you take a look on the right, and it says either a6 or taking immediately. a6 is for some reason slightly better, so it's not a huge difference, but if you want, you can go explore it. So after a6, basically, we have to take, and then they take. And why is this slightly better as opposed to the other one? We can basically ask the engine. So we could say, oh, queen c4, rook c4. Why is this? Okay, this is also -2. So let's go a little bit more slow. What's going on here? So after queen c4, oh, there it is. We actually lose our knight. So it's not giving up a piece for free because they undefend the knight by capturing that piece. So that is why we need a6. So after the capture, this move is a blunder because black has this a6 resource, which after we take, the queen is no longer pressuring the knight. So this is indeed a free piece. So this tiny difference does actually matter. So how do you determine, is this too small of a difference to look at? You can set yourself like a threshold. So you can say if the difference between the first variation and the second one is like 0.7 or above, then I'm going to take a look at it. Otherwise, I don't care. That's completely fine to understand. So that would be example of the first game. And of course, it was a big battle going forward, but these are some examples of how to use the engine in a real game. Let's take a look at our second game and see if there's any critical moments here. So this is a 1300-ish level game. And again, I'm just going to scroll through until we get our first sort of blunder or miss or mistake. Okay, so Caro Khan, and pretty interesting line here developing. So inaccuracy just because of the opportunity to go queen e7 to have the pin. So whenever you have a pin, you want to double down on that pin to potentially cause a lot of problems for your opponent. So here, queen e7 was the way to stop white from castling, because now if white castles, let's put it on the board, we could just go ahead and take this bishop for free. And if they trade queens, we're fine with that, but ultimately we're going to be up a piece. We have 3 minor pieces, they have 2. So we're utilizing the pin over here and putting pressure on it again to stop our opponent from castling. Makes sense. So why is 97 an inaccuracy? Because we didn't take the opportunity to do that, so now white got out of all the trouble. Again, should you care about that? If you're at a certain level where you think you should, so like 1700, 1800 plus, then yes. But at these levels, like 1500 below, not that big of a deal. Games are decided mostly by blunders. So knight f8 played, typical defensive maneuver. With a knight on f8, there is no mate. And the game continues. F5, okay. Still looking for the first mistake or blunder or something severe. So far, we have a good position with black. Nice centralized adjacent bishops. Knight's doing well. We're about to include all our pieces. And most of the battle will be happening on these open files, probably. Let's take a look. Bishop c7, c4. Why is c4 flagged as a mistake? So you could analyze also and learn from your opponent's mistakes, not just your own. And let's take a look. So first, if you would like to, you could figure this out on your own. So don't look at the engine. You can turn it off if you want, but it's going to be, if you can't figure it out on your own, it's going to be easier to just ask the engine and have a conversation. So the engine is saying, oh, significant advantage to black, almost 2 points, after bishop takes f3. Huh. And you could take a look at that and try to calculate it out yourself and figure it out. Or you could keep on asking the engine. So here we could see that, just to practice calculation a little bit, after bishop takes back, we just have rook takes e1 check, queen has to recapture, and then the queen is no longer protecting d4, so we could go ahead and take the free pawn. So this is a tactic which wins a pawn according to my calculation, and now I could double check it using the engine. So let's take a look if that was correct. Of course, I should mention, if they go g takes f, that's just horrible for their kingside structure, and you would just continue to attack the king long term. Maybe some sort of queen h4 or something. So bishop takes. So bishop takes is the most logical one, not to ruin the structure. And now we have rook e1. But notice what happened here. If you take a look at the engine actually says queen d4 is stronger. And I may be like, huh, doesn't that blunder a queen? Hello? So you can ask the engine, or you could trust it and try to figure it out yourself. But you could see, oh, after queen d4, the main challenge is queen takes queen, but then rook e1 becomes checkmate because our bishop is covering the only escape square. So this move order is slightly more beneficial by 0.5, so like half of a pawn more beneficial. Although the most logical, intuitive move order is the more forcing one. So rook takes rook because it's a check, so nothing can go wrong, basically. So here. This is the first one that I personally saw, but as soon as the engine was like queen takes d4, I was like, oh, got it, because we're covering the escape square. So maybe you make a mistake in calculation like this, and you can be like, okay, next time I'm going to watch out for reverse move orders as well. So anytime that the engine tells you something that you don't expect, you could either write it down, and then you're going to find typical mistakes that you usually make, or something to pay attention to more for next time. That's how you get practical lessons and takeaways out of analyzing your games while your thoughts are still fresh. So rook takes e1 is the more human move because it's a check. First we look at checks and only then it captures. But here this is apparently slightly better. Pretty cool. Let's see the next critical moment. So c4 was a mistake because of this possibility. But black did not take advantage of it. Bishop e4 was played and the game just continues. So slightly missed opportunity, that's okay. Okay, let's see our next mistake / inaccuracy. Okay, again, our opponent makes a mistake, c5. Why is this a mistake? Let's take a look. So basically, strategically, we can notice that they're splitting up their pawns. When it comes to 2 pawns, they love to be next to each other like this, because then they cover all of the row in front, and they can never be blocked because they cover each other's blocking square. Whereas when you push one of them, you will create holes between them. So c5 is strategically not a good move long term because there's a huge hole on d5 for black's pieces right now. Not the queen because it's going to get chased away by bishop c4, but the bishop, for example. So let's say we just move out of the way with d7 or something. Let's say they go bishop c4. Now we can play bishop d5. and this is a monster bishop for the rest of the game. If they trade it, then the queen replaces it, and there's no good way to dislodge the queen from here, so it's putting immense pressure on the pawn. Maybe this diagonal will become useful soon, and so on. And this pawn on c5 can never come back, so that's a very committal decision. That's why it's flagged as a mistake. So this is not a tactical mistake in the sense of we just win material, but it's a strategic mistake, meaning that long-term, white will suffer as a result of this move. So what should we have played? Queen to d7, just pull back from this one-move attack, and black is doing very well. He's gonna put pressure on the weak d-pawn and use the square in front of the weakness to place their pieces long term. What was played in the game? Queen e7. Why is this a big difference? So, if it's not obvious to you immediately, you have to take a look at the engine again. So try to analyze it yourself and then see, oh, I should have seen that. But if you really can't figure out why something is a mistake, blunder, or miss, then try to ask the engine, as we have been doing so far. So queen e7 is a mistake because it lines up with the enemy rook. So now, as soon as they play bishop to c4, as I'm pretty sure they did, yeah, this bishop is pinned, so it cannot go bishop d5 and deal with this threat. So we have to go very passive in order to protect this, either rook f8 or knight h8. We have to go very much backwards in order to protect against bishop takes f7 or knight takes f7, due to pinning ourselves. So obviously in chess, you would never want to pin yourself. You never want to place yourself under a pin. So these X-ray attacks, that's what they're called, when one piece is attacking another through other pieces, these X-ray attacks are something to watch out for. When their rook is lined up with your queen or king, that's a signal that you should get out of there as soon as possible before it turns into a pin, discovered attack, something. So for that reason, queen d7 was more accurate, getting out of this rook and allowing bishop d5 next move. And again, black is in full control in this position. Utilizing these weaknesses, so they're probably rook a d8 next move, or kick the opponent back, something like this. So for next time, the practical takeaway from this moment is keep a better eye on X-ray attacks. Keep an extra eye out for that in future games. So, dear student, if you recognize yourself in this game during this video, that's your lesson for next time. Moving on, queen e7, bishop c4, rook f8. Why is rook f8 a mistake? This one is not obvious, but the essential thing is that after queen h5, the only way to deal with this is h6, but then queen takes g6 takes advantage of the pin. So for that reason, knight h8 had to be played here. Let's just check the engine. Yeah, exactly. So knight h8 is the only way to keep holding on because it removes this dynamic of after queen h5 taking the knight. So knight h8. And at that point, against queen h5, we're more than happy to play h6 and just force this guy back or into a trade. And this is rock solid. We have enough defenders of f7. There's no tricky tactics, just like last time, like in that other variation. And black may survive this position. So, for that reason, rook f8 is a mistake. Should you see this? Probably not. At the level of 1300, seeing that after queen h5, the only defense is h6, and then you get into a pin, that's a bit unrealistic to see. Especially if you calculate that far and see, oh, I can just take their knight. So let's say queen h5, that's how it happened in the game, h6. And, okay, white played knight takes f7, but if queen g6, if you think, oh, I can just recapture, not a problem, then it's a bit problematic because you haven't spent enough time on calculating this out fully. The problem with this is just bishop takes g5. And every single piece is in the attack here, and I don't see a way to save against all the threats, basically. So the main issue is that if you just slide over or something, bishop f6 happens, as we can see, engine confirms, and queen g7 is unstoppable checkmate. Why? The g-pawn is pinned, so we cannot take this one. F-pawn is pinned because of this one, so we can't take here. Queen takes g7 is a pre-move checkmate. Yeah, nothing we can do. So, for that reason, rook f8 was a mistake. Is this something that we can get a practical takeaway from? Not really. So this requires way too deep of a calculation for this particular level. So I would just say unlucky. So we got into a position where we have a really difficult position, and your most logical moves become mistakes as a result of this. So that's why queen e7 was such a big deal. because it didn't allow your most logical move to be okay. And after that, it was just a clean game. White ended up converting in beautiful fashion. So last game, we have an 1800-ish rated game. So let's scroll through until we see the first mistake. So the main takeaway for now should be don't care about inaccuracies regardless of your level, basically, until you're about 2000 or so. And basically, talk to the engine is one big takeaway. What else? And once you figure out why something is a mistake, you have to basically see, oh, this is a mistake that I should see next time, that I shouldn't make next time. Whereas this, honestly, unlucky. Like, that's just too deep for me to see. Fair enough. So here, let's see how this goes. 9BDs. Okay, this is the first mistake. Why is this a mistake? So this is still pretty early. So ideally, this should be a part of opening theory at this level. But the reason this is a mistake is because that's where the other knight wants to come in case of e5. So this is a very modern opening, which means that you don't control the center at the start of the game, but rather you allow your opponent to get all the center they want, because then you're going to pawn break it and use it as a target of your attack. That's the idea with these hyper-modern openings. It doesn't matter. But for now, all you should know is that if you're going to play something like this, you have to know a lot of theory and variations and move orders to not make mistakes like this. Because after knight bd7, this is a very logical looking move, but after e5, there is no good response for black. Why am I saying that? Because even if we take this recapture with whatever they want, probably f-pawn to open up this guy, but we have to move the knight somewhere. And the question is where to go. If you go knight g4 or something, you just get kicked away by h3. We go to the edge of the board, not great. Knight h5 is just trapped by g4, from what I can see. Yeah. So we have to go knight e8, basically, which is an ugly move in and of itself. And now this center is basically pressuring our pieces enough to make them useless against the attack. So h4, h5 is a quick attack for white. And if you're playing this opening, this is not something that you want. You want to pressure the center. You want to be the attacker while your opponent barely holds onto the center. So whenever they could do something like this safely, that's a red flag. So for that reason, c5 is one of the main moves here. Yeah, agreed. c5, basically trying to break down the center as well immediately to try and cause as many weaknesses as possible. So after, let's say, d5, you continue breaking it down with e6. And the point is that sooner or later it has to break. They can't hold everything because they don't have enough development and pieces in the fight to do so. To give you a short example, let's say bishop d3 development or something, already we just trade, and if they take with an e-pawn, bang, rook e8 check. And we already get something tangible out of our breaking down the center. This diagonal is now open, our rook is open, we could possibly use the pin to do a lot of cool stuff, and it's white on the back foot. If they take with a c-pawn, then this is our main target, and the way we take advantage of that is with a typical b5 idea, distracting one of these pieces to be able to weaken the e-pawn. So now let's say that they go bishop takes b5. I think this already may work. Yeah, knight e4, queen a5. They go back and we remove the defender. Typical tactic for this opening. So again, these are things that must be memorized at the start, because this opening breaks a principle of chess. A principle of the opening, control the center. Whenever you break a principle, you have to know exactly what you're doing. So this may be a problem of not necessarily chess misunderstanding. I'm sure this is something that my student knows, but this was a mixing up of variations. Oftentimes when you learn a complicated opening, you get the lines slightly mixed up, and that's okay. It can happen. But the point is that you learn from this. So it's not a problem when you make a mistake. Making the mistake is not a problem. We're all human. We're supposed to make mistakes. Learning from the mistake is the problem. Not learning from the mistake is a very big problem, because then you're going to keep making the same mistake and you're just going to have a hole in your repertoire. So people are going to get free rating against you if they play into that variation. So after knight d7, bishop d3, the opponent does not see it. c5, okay, d5, a5. This is a big strategic mistake. Why? Because once the structure is like this, they have a space advantage and we should start breaking it down. So e6 and b5 are the main pawn breaks of this opening. And when you go a5, it's significantly more difficult. I would go as far as to say impossible to make b5 work again. once you go a5, because that a pawn is supposed to protect the b pawn in many of these variations. So a5 is a huge strategic mistake. Notice whatever white plays is okay. So that's how you can recognize, oh, this is probably like a strategic long-term mistake. Whereas if they only have like one variation which wins and everything else is better for us, very likely that's a tactical mistake. So just to separate the two, so you know how to think about this. a5, castles, knight b6. This knight doesn't really do a whole lot, so I feel like black is struggling to find a plan. E5 break, we take, knight g4, okay, and there's the first mistake. So we have a lot of pressure on the d pawn and the e pawn, and white did not find the only precise way forward, which was to utilize a counterattack to break this perfect setup that we got going on. So bishop g5 was the only move, apparently. Everything else already leads to equality, maybe even better for black. So after bishop f4, the point is that now we have a 3 versus 2 on the pawn here, if you do the quick count. And before you actually play it, just make sure you calculate to confirm the quick count. So we take, they take back, we take, they take back, and we take. Fine. And there's no discoveries or anything because this cannot give check. So that's how it went in the game. Bishop g5 played now, which is a mistake because of, let's take a look. Let's try to calculate this one out. We can't take this one because it's protected. It's probably going to be some sort of knight c3. Yeah, unsure about this. Let me ask the engine here. It is knight c3, bc3, queen c7, and we're just playing chess. Okay. So currently we're up a pawn, so as long as we keep that extra pawn, we should be fine. So this being a mistake was indicative that white had some sort of compensation for the pawn beforehand. Let's see, knight takes d5, queen takes, and queen e2. Okay, the engine doesn't get too excited. It just says, oh, sure, black, you have a pawn, but your queen is in the center of the board, so I'm going to get some tempo moves later on that. And your extra pawn isn't necessarily the best pawn in the world. These are a little bit split up and weak. And also your knight has some problems. So, okay, I can see the possible compensation here for white. Fair enough. White goes a little bit inaccurate here. Let's see, the next mistake. Knight f3 is a mistake. Why is that a mistake? Not obvious to me at first. So probably it's better to keep this guy here, but it's not obvious to me why, because unpinning makes a lot of sense. Okay, Mr. Engine, what do you got? c4 is best. Okay, I mean, it's intact, but they just move out of the way. Should be 6. What is the difference between these? Okay, this is another one of those low difference. So the difference between the best move and what my student played is 0.5, but it's flagged as a mistake. That is very surprising to me, honestly. But let's see how this plays out. So rook takes f3. Okay, queen takes was just more intuitive. So this is one of those that I would tell my student, honestly, don't worry about it. I also would have unpinned myself first chance I got. So bishop e5 here, e1. So far, great. So we're up a clean pawn. No, 2 pawns, actually. We're up 2 pawns with centralized bishops. No real problems in the position. Our opponent has some problems, so minus 2.5 is pretty much justified. Bishop g4, game continues. Bishop f5, wonderful. So we're up 2 pawns. We want to trade down equally. So we're utilizing a fork to force a trade. A lot of people would offer trades, but it's important to try to force them. Because if you just offer a trade, your opponent will decline it. Oh, wow. Very nice. Okay. Good job, Mr. Student, who will remain unnamed. But utilizing a tactic in order to simplify the position drastically. This deserves a brilliant, I'm sure. So queen takes, and the point is bishop to f5, skewering the rook. So we sacrifice an exchange to win back an exchange. But what did we achieve? We traded off a pair of rooks and a pair of bishops. So let's say they go queen d1 or something, takes and takes back. And we have significantly simplified the position. Okay, g3 is just losing this one. Here, awesome. Not only that, but now that I see it a little bit deeper, after this entire sequence, we even have queen h4, which is a fork. So this was pretty insane. Awesome, lovely finish. But that's how we saw some of these mistakes. So these higher level ones can sometimes, even an inaccuracy could be important, but for the most part, still focus on these mistakes. Some mistakes are explainable and don't do them next time. Basically, next time in this position, try to play a6 to go b5 to distract this pawn and one of these pieces to have more pressure on e4. That's generally how this setup is played. So I'm not sure if this was a move order issue or maybe a misclick. Maybe a6 they wanted to play, but misclicked to a5. That's why you have to analyze this as soon as the game ends, because your thoughts are still fresh. You know what you were thinking. So if you analyze a game from 2 weeks back, you're not going to remember anything. So for that reason, that's where the most instructive things happen. Hopefully, all of these techniques and little tweaks of how to use the engine, what is important, what is not, is going to be useful for you in improving your game. That's all I wanted to cover for today. So thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions or anything on your mind, feel free to drop a comment down below, like on the video, subscribe on it to let me know that you enjoyed this type of stuff, and I will talk to you very soon. Take it easy.